Hello, St Mary in the Valley and anyone else. Another COVID special. I'm going to do another book review today. I can't show you the book that I'm reviewing because, well, there's a kind of a story there. A few years ago, Kath put me on she converted me to audiobooks. And so I do a lot of my reading in a way that means it's technically not reading, it's listening. It means you can get through a lot more. In the car, as you're driving, you can listen. When I'm washing up, that's a particular winner because it takes me a very long time. I can get halfway through War and Peace before I get to the cutlery. So yeah, audiobooks are a great way to increase your reading intake. Now, I just finished the third instalment of a trilogy, which is about the life of Thomas Cromwell. So a series of historical novels written by Hilary Mantel. A number of years, maybe 10 years ago, her first novel came out in this series called Wolf Hall. And then she released a second novel called Bring Up the Bodies. And those two novels were turned into a BBC mini-series, which is really good. And then this year, the long-awaited final instalment in the Wolf Hall Trilogy, The Mirror and the Light, came out. And I've just finished it not long ago. So I've been living in the world of Tudor England, and it's been a lot of fun. Wow, these are really amazing books. She is such a gifted writer. Hilary Mantel has this way of getting into the mind of a person and helping you to really feel like you're in their head. You know, and the particular person she's chosen is a fascinating choice. Thomas Cromwell, he's not one of history's more sympathetic characters. He is famous for being Henry VIII's kind of political fixer. And but it is a fascinating story, and in Hilary Mantel's hands, this kind of ambiguous character is somebody you find yourself wanting to cheer for. He has this sort of obscure origin. He was a blacksmith's son from Putney, and he finds himself working for Cardinal Wolsey. Cardinal Wolsey, you may know, was very, very powerful. What was he, Lord Chancellor, I think, under Henry VIII. And then he fell from grace when he failed to secure for Henry the annulment of his marriage to Catherine of Aragon. Henry had fallen in love with Anne Boleyn. He desperately wanted to marry her, but the Pope wouldn't get him a divorce, and Wolsey wasn't able to persuade the Pope, and so Wolsey falls from grace and dies. But as this is all happening, Henry VIII notices this person who has been working very loyally for Wolsey, and this person is Thomas Cromwell. And so Henry finally brings Thomas Cromwell into his retinue and finds in him a very, very formidably effective public servant, civil servant, a political genius, a guy with a tremendous work ethic and a way of, you know, just navigating his way through the rat holes of Tudor politics in a world where everybody around him is a duke or a lord and is privileged by birth. But here's this self-made man who finds himself incredibly the most important man in the realm apart from Henry himself. So this is a story about political intrigue. It's kind of like House of Cards but in Tudor costumes. But it's not as if the Tudor thing is just the backdrop and the costume setting. Hilary Mantel is too good a historian for that. She has done her homework really, really well. And she's widely regarded, I think, as a very credible historian of the era. She's researched the life of Cromwell, and where the work then becomes pure fiction, it's still fiction in a way that makes sense of the hard data that we have. So if you find the chronicle of a man's life, his inner life, an interesting prospect, then these are great books to read. If you have ever worked for a deranged narcissist, and if you live in Canberra, there's a good chance you have. In fact, there's a reasonable chance you are the deranged narcissist, but no deranged narcissist ever realises that. So, but if you've ever worked for somebody who's almost impossible, well, spare a thought for Thomas Cromwell, who found himself working for Henry VIII at a point when Henry VIII was becoming older and crankier, more convinced of his own genius, more superstitious. and more of a loon as he becomes frantically concerned about his dynasty and his desire to have a male heir. Cromwell is caught up in all of that drama. Another reason to read these books is because they tell us part of our origin story as the Anglican Church. It's not all pretty. The English Reformation, of all of the Reformations that were happening in Europe at the time, is the one that I like the most. I think it produced the most sort of sensible, centrist stance on things. It tried to bring the old insights of the medieval church in line with Reformation insights into Scripture and doctrines of grace, and I think to that extent it was really a wonderful achievement. But so learning a bit about the story of that journey is really very instructive. We still live with the benefits and the legacy, both good and ill, of that story, particularly those of us who worship in Anglican churches. It's Thomas Cranmer who gets most of the credit for the English Reformation and what it was able to achieve, but Cromwell worked alongside him very effectively, taking care of the civil realm while Cranmer took care of the religious realm. And they managed to achieve an awful lot for people who were working for somebody as unpredictable and as tyrannical as Henry VIII was. I do have one sort of reservation, though, about these books and their perspective on Thomas Cromwell. And I just have this feeling that the reason why Hilary Mantel is so enthusiastic about him and has locked onto him as this person to elevate as a great person of his time is perhaps not so much that Cromwell was on the side of the Reformation, although he was. I have a suspicion it's more to do with the fact that he opposed the medieval Catholic Church. Because Hilary Mantel certainly opposes the Catholic Church. She herself is a lapsed Catholic and she's no friend of Roman Catholicism. And I think perhaps in Cromwell she sees a figure from history who was opposed to the church that she, in her own life, has come to find herself in opposition to. Now, fair enough, but I think it's a bit anachronistic to look at somebody from the Tudor era and see them as kind of an early version of us, an early secularist. One of the things about Cromwell is whenever he encounters somebody of genuine religious conviction, one of the martyrs of the Reformation, or indeed someone like Man for All Seasons, Thomas, what was his name? Thomas More. Everyone in that day seemed to be called Thomas. Thomas More. Whenever he encounters Thomas More, he sees him. There's a sort of a rolling of the eyes and like, oh, here we go again, sort of instinct that Cromwell seems to have, at least the way Mantel describes him. Whenever you meet genuine religious conviction, Cromwell himself seems just to be a little bit aloof from that. Formally he's a Christian. He says his prayers and so on, but underneath you just get the feeling he thinks it's all a load of hooey. And I don't think that doesn't ring true to me. I don't think that that's how people back in Tudor England really felt. I mean, this is before the Enlightenment. This is a time when people really, it wasn't weird to care about your soul. It's weird now, sadly, but it wasn't weird then to have concerns for your soul, to feel like you were living in this great drama, hanging somewhere between heaven and hell, and religious conviction mattered. People were going to the stake in fairly large numbers because of religious conviction. So I don't quite buy this idea that Cromwell was kind of an early proto-secularist. I don't think that doesn't seem plausible to me. And maybe in my next book review, I'll take you to another novel of the same period that leaves even these great novels for dead, in my view. But that'll be next time. So read them. I think they're wonderful. I think you'll enjoy them. She writes so beautifully. Every now and then she descends to a kind of a crass sort of grotty sort of something, but mostly it's just so good. And it's a great example of the fact that if you attend to someone, any life, if you attend to it, you'll find something there to sympathise with. You'll find a person there. And Hilary Mantel does this to this figure from history, Thomas Cromwell. You get to know his family, you get to know his griefs, you get to know his inner world to a large degree. And I'd love for you to read them. Let me know. It'll keep you going for a long time. They're pretty chunky books, but they're really worth the effort. So have a read. Let me know what you think. See you next time.